Welcome, my bountiful friends. It's time to lower your IQ and become the butt of other people's jokes before suddenly shooting your intellect to that of a genius and pondering the nature of mankind and society's cruelties. Because today we're going to night school in Daniel Keyes' super sad story, Flowers for Algernon. This story centers on a lovable but simple soul who strives for average intellect and average ways, but is instead given an accelerated route to genius. And as always, there will be as many spoilers as there are mazes and dead mice. And there will be plenty of opinions too, so you have been warned. But before we begin in earnest, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. Flowers for Algernon emerged from a convergence of personal experience, professional frustration, and a growing cultural fascination with intelligence, psychology, and human potential in mid-20th century America. Daniel Keyes had worked as a teacher for adults with intellectual disabilities, and the ethical tensions he encountered, particularly in the gap between institutional ambition and the lived reality of his students, seeded the novel's central question. What would it mean for someone with a low IQ to become suddenly highly intelligent, and what would that transformation cost? This early conceptual spark was sharpened by Keyes' own ambivalence about the pressure he faced as a young writer, and gives the book its distinct blend of psychological intimacy and moral inquiry. The developmental breakthrough came when Keyes discovered the narrative device that would define the work, the progress reports. By allowing Charlie Gordon to narrate his own cognitive ascent and decline, Keyes created a structure that was both formally innovative and emotionally disarming. The shifting grammar, vocabulary, and self-awareness became a built-in chronicle of transformation, enabling readers to inhabit Charlie's changing mind rather than merely observe it. This device also allowed him to explore the ethical dimensions of scientific experimentation with unusual immediacy, as Charlie's voice became the terrain on which the experiment's consequences unfolded. The story first appeared not as a novel but as a novelette. After multiple rejections from editors who found the ending too bleak, Keyes sold the shorter version to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, where it was published in April 1959. The piece was an immediate critical success, winning the Hugo Award for Best Short Story the following year. Its reception demonstrated that readers were willing to embrace the tragic arc that publishers had feared, and it created the momentum for Keyes to expand the narrative into a full-length novel. The novel version, published in 1966 by Harcourt, Brace and World, deepened the emotional and ethical complexity of the original. Keyes had added new characters, expanded Charlie's relationships, and gave greater weight to the social and psychological consequences of his transformation. The novel went on to win the Nebula Award and quickly became a staple of both science fiction and mainstream literary circles, establishing itself as one of the most enduring explorations of intelligence, identity, and the human cost of scientific ambition. Charlie Gordon is the protagonist and narrator. He starts with a low IQ and undergoes an experimental procedure intended to increase his intelligence. The novel is told through his first-person progress reports, letting us experience his cognitive, emotional, and moral transformation from the inside. Algernon is a laboratory mouse who undergoes the same experimental procedure as Charlie. Algernon's progress and his later decline acts as a living mirror and a warning for Charlie's own fate. Professor Harold Nemur is one of the scientists behind the intelligence enhancing experiment. He's brilliant but emotionally distant and is deeply invested in the success of the procedure and what it means for his reputation. Dr. Strauss is the psychiatrist who helps design and oversee the experiment. He's more compassionate than Nemur and shows genuine concern for Charlie as a person rather than just as a test subject. Alice Kinnion is Charlie's teacher at the Adult Education Center before the experiment. She believes in his potential early on and later struggles with the emotional consequence of Charlie's rapid intellectual growth. Joe Karp is one of Charlie's co-workers at the bakery. He's initially friendly but often cruel in his ignorance. Joe represents how society mocks difference while mistaking cruelty for humour. And Frank Riley is another co-worker who participates in teasing Charlie. His behaviour highlights how Charlie's social position shifts as his intelligence changes. Rose Gordon is Charlie's mother, and she's seen through fragmented memories. She's intense, fearful, and obsessed with normalcy, and she plays a major role in Charlie's early trauma and self-image. Matt Gordon is Charlie's passive, withdrawn father. His inability to protect his son from the mother's volatility leaves a lasting emotional imprint on Charlie. Norma Gordon is Charlie's younger sister. Her presence in his memories reflect themes of displacement, shame, and familial rejection. The story unfolds through a series of first-person progress reports written by Charlie Gordon, a man with an IQ of 68, who works at a bakery and longs to be smart. His writing at the outset is fragmented, phonetic, and emotionally transparent, establishing both his vulnerability and his earnest desire for self-improvement. He is selected for an experimental brain surgery designed to dramatically increase intelligence, a procedure previously tested only on a mouse named Algernon. The early sections follow Charlie's anticipation, confusion, and trust in the scientists, namely Dr. Strauss and Professor Nemur, who treat him both as a subject and as a symbol. After the operation, Charlie's cognitive growth accelerates rapidly. His spelling improves, his vocabulary expands, and his awareness of social dynamics sharpens. This ascent is exhilarating but destabilizing. He begins to perceive the condescension, cruelty, and exploitation that had previously been invisible to him. The bakery co-workers he once considered friends reveal themselves as bullies. The teachers he admired appear limited. The scientists he trusted seem more invested in professional acclaim than in his well-being or in improving society. As Charlie's intelligence surpasses that of everyone around him, he becomes increasingly isolated, caught between the person he was and the person he is becoming. His relationship with Alice Kinnion, his former adult education teacher, becomes a central emotional thread. Their connection is tender but fraught. His intellectual growth outpaces his emotional development, and his newfound self-awareness brings both longing and fear. His attempts at intimacy are complicated by traumatic childhood memories that resurface as his mind expands. Memories of institutionalization, parental rejection, and the pressure to be normal. These recollections deepen the novel's psychological texture, showing that intelligence alone cannot overcome and heal old wounds. Parallel to Charlie's rise as Algernon's decline, the mouse, once a symbol of science's triumph, begins to deteriorate, losing coordination and cognitive ability. Charlie recognises that Algernon's fate foreshadows his own. He conducts independent research, discovers the flaw in the experimental design, and predicts the inevitable reversal of his intellectual gains. This discovery marks a shift from ambition to existential dread, and from scientific subject to scientific critic. As Charlie's intelligence peaks and then begins to erode, the narrative voice regresses. His writing becomes simpler, his insights blur, and his emotional world contracts. Yet the final phase is not merely tragic, it carries a quiet dignity. Charlie chooses to leave New York to spare Alice the pain of witnessing his decline. His last request, that someone place flowers on Algernon's grave, serves as a gesture of solidarity between these two unique beings who were elevated and subsequently ruined by the same experiment. The novel closes with Charlie's voice returning to its initial simplicity, but now layered with the reader's memory of who he briefly became. The tragedy lies not only in the loss of intelligence, but in the fleeting glimpse of connection, autonomy, and selfhood that cannot be sustained. The experience of the novel is one of the richest a reader can find in literature, and it's delivered by its style and its atmosphere. It is defined above all by its use of progress reports as a narrative frame. This device allows Keyes to fuse form and psychology so tightly that the reader experiences Charlie Gordon's cognitive shifts not as described events, but as changes in the very texture of the prose itself. The early entries are marked by phonetic spelling, fragmented syntax, and a childlike earnestness. These stylistic features create an atmosphere of vulnerability and immediacy. The reader is placed inside a mind that is open, trusting, and unguarded. The simplicity of the language generates a quiet, almost fragile tone, as though the narrative itself could be harmed by too much scrutiny. As Charlie's intelligence increases, the style undergoes a dramatic transformation. The prose becomes more complex, analytical, and self-conscious. Sentences lengthen, vocabulary expands, and the tone shifts from naive optimism to intellectual intensity. This stylistic evolution produces an atmosphere of acceleration, an almost vertiginous sense of ascent. Yet the heightened intelligence also introduces emotional distance. The writing becomes cooler, more precise, and at times detached, reflecting Charlie's growing alienation from the people around him. The atmosphere in the middle phase is one of brilliance edged with loneliness. Keyes uses this stylistic shift to create a layered emotional landscape. The more articulate Charlie becomes, the more he perceives the limitations, hypocrisies, and cruelties of others. The tone darkens, acquiring a brittle, sometimes caustic edge. The atmosphere becomes charged with tension. His intellectual power is rising, but for every incremental increase in IQ, there's a corresponding eroding of his emotional grounding as he realizes the appalling truth of his own and society's past and present nature. This contrast between cognitive mastery and social dislocation gives the novel its distinctive sense of unease. The decline phase reverses the stylistic trajectory. Charlie's intelligence deteriorates, the prose simplifies again, yet it carries the ghost of what came before. The atmosphere becomes melancholic. The reader can tangibly track the person who Charlie has become slowly slipping away. Keyes uses this regression to create a sense of fading light, a dimming that is both linguistic and existential. The tone becomes tender, resigned, and quietly devastating. Throughout the novel, the atmosphere is shaped by a tension between clinical detachment and emotional intimacy. Ultimately, the style and atmosphere of Flowers are inseparable from its thematic core. The novel's shifting voice embodies the instability of identity, the fragility of intellect, and the emotional cost of transformation. The atmosphere is one of beauty shadowed by inevitability, a world where every moment of clarity carries the seeds of its own disappearance. At its core, Flowers is a study of intelligence as both aspiration and burden. The novel dismantles the assumption that higher intelligence automatically produces happiness or moral clarity. Charlie's ascent reveals that intelligence can isolate as much as it empowers. His growing cognitive abilities enable him to truly perceive social cruelty, institutional hypocrisy, and the limits of empathy in those around him for the first time. Yet his emotional development lags far behind his rapid intellectual growth, creating an incoherence that becomes one of the novel's central tensions. Intelligence in Key's hands is not a gift, but rather a double-edged sword that reshapes identity, relationships, and self-perception. Closely tied to this theme is that of identity and the continuity of the self. The novel asks whether Charlie before and Charlie after are the same person, or whether the experiment effectively creates a new consciousness. The progress reports function as a record of this instability. The voice changes, the worldview shifts, and the emotional register transforms. Keyes uses this fragmentation to explore how memory, trauma, and self-awareness interact with one another. Charlie's childhood recollections, which were once largely misunderstood or inaccessible to him, are now devastating in their harsh clarity, forcing him to confront the ways in which identity is built from both what we know and what we repress. Another major theme is the ethics of scientific experimentation, particularly the treatment of vulnerable subjects. Charlie is simultaneously a human being and a research object, and the novel never lets the reader forget this duality. Professor Niemeyer and Dr. Strauss embody different scientific impulses. They're ambitious, cautious, paternalistic, but both fail to fully grasp Charlie's humanity. Algernon's decline becomes a symbolic indictment of a system that prioritizes discovery over dignity. The novel's ethical critique is not anti-science, it is anti-hubris. It exposes the moral blind spots that emerge when scientific progress is pursued without emotional intelligence or accountability. The theme of social exclusion and the desire for belonging runs throughout the narrative. Before the surgery, Charlie is mocked and exploited. After the surgery, he is feared, resented, or idealized. In both states, he is fundamentally alone. The novel suggests that society inherently marginalizes those who deviate too far from herd norms, regardless of the nature or form in which the deviation manifests itself. And lastly, the novel explores impermanence of human achievement. Charlie's rise and fall form a tragic arc that underscores the fleeting nature of intellect, memory, and even selfhood. The inevitability of its decline gives the novel its elegiac tone. The request to place flowers on Algernon's grave crystallizes the theme, a gesture of remembrance in a world where nothing, whether it be intelligence, identity, or life, can be held for long. Together, all these themes combine to create a work that is not simply about intelligence, but about what it means to be human in a society that struggles to recognize humanity in all its forms. When the short story version appeared in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in 1959, it was greeted as a startlingly original work. Critics praised its formal innovation and its humane treatment of a subject often handled with condescension or sentimentality. The story's Hugo Award in 1960 signalled that it struck a nerve with the science fiction community, which was beginning to embrace more psychological and social narratives. The novel's publication in 1966 expanded its critical footprint. Reviews highlighted the way he keys deep in the emotional and ethical complexity of the original story. Many critics admired the novel's ability to bridge genres. It was simultaneously science fiction, psychological realism, and moral philosophy. The Nebula Award it received that year confirmed its status as a major contribution to science fiction literature. Yet some early reviewers were uneasy with its tragic arc, arguing that its emotional power bordered on manipulation. This ambivalence would become a recurring feature of its critical history. Admiration for its craft paired with discomfort at its intensity. Over time, the novel's reputation solidified. By the 70s and 80s, the book had become a staple of school curricula in the United States and beyond. Educators valued its capacity to generate discussions about disability, scientific responsibility, and the nature of intelligence. This institutional embrace helped shift the novel from genre fiction to modern classic, though it also sparked debates about whether its portrayal of intellectual disability was progressive, paternalistic, or both. The novel's legacy is also shaped by its adaptations. The 1968 film Charlie, which earned Cliff Robertson an Academy Award, brought the story to a wider audience and cemented its cultural presence. Subsequent stage versions, radio adaptations, and international productions kept the narrative alive across generations. Each adaptation reinterpreted the central transformation, reinforcing the story's flexibility and emotional resonance. Today, its legacy rests on its dual power. It is both a deeply personal story of one man's rise and fall and a broader cultural critique of how society defines intelligence, worth, and humanity. Its endurance reflects not just its emotional impact, but its ability to provoke ongoing ethical and philosophical debate. For me, Flowers of Algernon is a rare book. Firstly, it's one of only a handful of novels that I've actually ever reread, which almost never happens because there's just so much stuff out there that I need to visit. Secondly, it comes with a heavy gut punch of emotion. I felt it intensely both times I read the book. I felt a great deal of pain, sadness, and empathy for Charlie, and I maintain that a box of Kleenex is a mandatory accessory for reading this book. And I can fully see why this novel would be controversial even to this day. It masterfully exposes the cruelties, the ignorance and shallowness not only of society at large, but also of individuals who exist within it, across all class strata, across multiple professions, both humble and lofty. And when something is exposed so thoroughly and so transparently, it takes real honesty and guts for someone to stand before the mirror and gaze into it, recognizing that the guilt and blemishes are born within. It doesn't matter if you're talking about 1,000 years ago, hundreds, or even decades, or whether it's concerning this society or another far away on the other side of the globe. The brutal truth is that most people lack the necessary robust qualities to enter into self-critique and recognize their own failings. Many would rather go walking around in a soft cotton wool ball of self-delusion and ignorance than face their own shadows. They hold dearly onto the mistaken belief that everything is as it should be and that nothing need change. It's easier than facing the ugly, cold, stark truth that requires acknowledgement and action on their own part. It's therefore much easier simply to sleep. The other thing that stood out for me about this book was that in order for Keyes to achieve this amazing feat of accurate social critique, he had to use his experience as a psychologist to create a precise and tailored protagonist. Charlie Gordon doesn't actually portray any single mental condition or disorder. He lacks the restricted interests and repetitive behaviors central to autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Nor does he show any sensory hypersensitivity, and his social misreading appears cognitive rather than structural. But he does present younger than his years and exhibits naivety and an inability to read social situations which does align with ASD. What he does display are the characteristics of mild intellectual disability, or ID as it's termed by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-5. ID is typified by concrete thinking, limited abstract reasoning, inability to do complex planning, and struggling with normal academic studies such as reading, spelling, and maths. Individuals with mild ID are more eager to please and more vulnerable to manipulation. But crucially, they're still adults with regular emotional reactions and needs. They want friends, romantic connections, and respect. However, Charlie is shown to be morally pure, almost childlike, despite being in his 30s and having been subjected to abandonment and a rough upbringing. He's completely devoid of suspicion and lacking in defensive instincts that someone with ID in his situation would probably exhibit. He has none of the expected sexuality, the stubbornness or reactive anger. Instead, he is unusually gentle and innocent. So what is he? Charlie is best described as a literary construct. He functions as the uncorrupted human baseline, a moral mirror and a critique of society. He is intentionally simplified to serve this function, as a thematic device for exploring the fragility of intelligence and social hierarchy. To achieve this level of thematic clarity, Keyes doesn't write Charlie as a clinically exact case study. He uses a protagonist who is a distilled yet amalgam figure, simplified and purified to serve a larger moral purpose of shining a powerful light on the dark recesses of the mind of society at large, including the average workplace as well as the institutions of academia and science. So what are your thoughts on this sad tale of one man's tragic transformation from simplicity to complexity and back again? Besides Charlie, which other characters spoke to you? And which scene did you find the most profound? Once more, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell icon for more deep dives into the world of literature. Until next time, keep reading and remember, if a pair of hubristic scientists come out of the woodwork and start offering you miracle treatments, be sure to insist on seeing the peer review and technical data before you sign up. And on that note, goodbye, and if you get a chance, put some flowers on Algernon's grave in the backyard.